Computer. All right. Welcome, everybody, to Satsang, the European edition. This lovely day, 9/25/2020. It's particularly auspicious. It's my wife's 50th birthday today. So after Satsang, I will be involved in celebrating 50 of her years. I'm at 67, so we've celebrated my version of that. So I'm going to go back 17 years and do that later on today. So welcome everybody. I wanted to just lead off a little bit today. I've had a lot of questions lately about the whole placement of emotion. What does emotion have to do with things? And so I thought that today would be a fun time to talk a little bit about emotion, just to get everybody located, because the emotional piece of life has a double-edged sword to it. It's really a beautiful part of humanity, but what it does is it lives in a place that is also, it focuses us on our body-mind, because emotion flows through the body-mind. So it's actually part of what we call duality. It's part of the drama of the ego. So the understanding of how emotion operates, it ends up being really, really important. And so I just invite everybody to watch as you work in your own stories and in your own life, how when emotion arises, if you connect it to your story, you're going to find that you're always making everything about you versus everyone else. Emotion will step you into that place. That's the basic nature of emotion. Again, not a bad thing, because think about it. You hold a baby and you get emotional about it. You go to a birthday party and the emotion flows. And so where emotion plays, it's really excellent. But when it plays as part of your story, in terms of deciding between this and that, it has a separating effect. It glues you to you. And so that's just a way to understand it. And so there's a whole set of words that we always use that connote how awareness and emotion are different. And awareness is simply the viewing of everything from a place of consciousness. So you can do that yourself if you want to. If you close your eyes and you actually become aware of yourself, you're also going to be aware of yourself and everything else. You're going to see that awareness, when you're in that particular place, covers everything. It holds everything. In fact, we even believe that awareness is ours only, and it's not. Everybody has exactly the same awareness. Consciousness has that awareness that actually is in you, it's in me, it sees through me, it sees through you. When emotion comes into play, what it does is it narrows that down, because it lives in our body, and the intellect or the ego takes over and it claims the territory for itself. And that's the operation, that's just simply the operation of the ego. So the terms that you hear a lot of times in the spiritual journey, the first one is surrender. Now, surrender is kind of an emotional version of the idea of letting things happen. The other word is acceptance. That's a bit more of an awareness word as well. And the third one is dispassion. All three of those terms are the same thing. And what they connote is the seen from awareness and not the seen from emotion. It's trying to break those two things into two places. So I just wanted to kind of note that. So note, when we're working with story, a lot of times people try to locate the story that's true as opposed to the story that's not. And I've been working with everybody to hold two stories at the same time. Why do I do that? When you hold one story only and claim it's true, typically that's an emotional connection. In other words, you're very emotionally glued to that story, and you're rejecting every other story. On the other hand, when you see it from everything that is, and you hold two stories at the same time, what happens is the charge, the emotional piece or the glue that makes you attached to one story, it goes away. You can't hold two stories at the same time and actually have that emotion. So I use that example of you're driving down the road and someone cuts you off and you get all upset because they're a really bad driver. So you call them, in the California version of that is that we make hand signals and call them really bad names. So that's what we do there. And then, but if I tell you, hey, look, that's a man and he's got his young daughter and he's trying to save her life and he's rushing to the emergency room, all of a sudden you go, wow, right? All of that anger, all of that stuff ends up basically coming out because you're holding two stories at the same time. And it's impossible to hold both of those stories, right? So a lot of times when somebody will ask me a question in Satsang, you notice, I want you to see, just watch what I do. I'll ask them to tell me, well, what's another story that covers that? And what I'm attempting to do is get them to not emotionally connect to the story any longer. That's what's going on there. That's all I'm trying to do. You can do that same thing for yourself. The same as the driving example, right? So there was in the ancient days of China, there was a farmer who lived. These are when they had the small kingdoms and they were always fighting each other. China had this wonderful history where what they would do is that they had small kingdoms, and the small kingdoms were always at some kind of war level with all the other small kingdoms. If you read the history of China, that's what you're going to read about, is a whole bunch of little kingdoms fighting other little kingdoms. And some years one kingdom was in a great place, and then the next year another kingdom. Kind of like if you watch the English Premier League, how one year Chelsea's good and the next year Arsenal's good, and like that. So that's how it was in China, all these little kingdoms. And there was a farmer in one of the kingdoms, and so he had a son, and they had some horses. So they were farming, and they had their little horses. One day the horse ran off. And wow, all the neighbors came over and they said, "Oh man, you poor man, your horse ran off. That's the worst thing that ever happened." And the farmer looked at him and he said, "Well, maybe." Neighbors are kind of stunned by that. Well, the next day, the horse came back with about 6 wild horses. All the neighbors came over and they said, "Holy cow, that's the best thing that's ever happened. What a cool result." And the farmer said, "Well, maybe." Well, the next day, what happened is that, the son was out there, and what he's trying to do is he was trying to tame the wild horses. So he was doing getting them to, accept a saddle and what you do with a horse, and one of the horses bucked him off and he broke his leg. All the neighbors came over and said, "Oh my God, your son has broken his leg. He's the one that helps you work the ranch and farm. What a terrible result." Farmer said, "Maybe." Well, sure enough, the following day, the governor of the territory came by, and what they were doing is that they were grabbing all the healthy-bodied young farmers, right? They were going to take them and put them in the army because were having a little fight with next door, typical kingdom to kingdom thing. But they found this son and he had a broken leg, and they were like, "Yeah, can't take him." Sure enough, guess what? Neighbors came over and said, "Wow, best thing in the whole world." So notice that what that farmer was doing was that he was using his intelligence, and instead of jumping on what he saw as the result of the story, he was holding the possibility that that story wasn't what it meant. And so instead of saying, "Oh my goodness, one of the horses got away, that's the worst thing that ever happened. Oh my goodness, he came back with some wild horses, that's the best thing that ever happened. Oh my goodness, son broke his leg. Oh my goodness," right? So it's holding those stories. In a way, what he was doing was saying, I'm going to hold space that what this story looks like may not be what's really going on. When you do that, you move out of the emotion. Remember, his neighbors, they didn't understand what was going on because they were like, "Oh, this is the best thing. This is the worst thing. This is the best thing. This is the worst thing." They were basically in the roller coaster of emotion. You may notice your life goes like that a lot, right? You get up one day and life's wonderful because the roller coaster is going up, and the next day your life is the worst thing ever because the roller coaster is going down, right? But the way to maybe take a look and get into the awareness position is to watch all of that happen. So there's a surrender, right? A surrender to the fact that the story that seems obvious may not be. There's an acceptance that, okay, well, today's story is this, but tomorrow's story may be something else, right? And there's also, dispassion, right? Because when you're passionate about the ups and you're passionate about the downs, but you move to this other place where you hold two stories at the same time, then all of a sudden, you end up with a place where you can see more clearly. And that's really what this journey is about. The ego, that we all agree is running our lives. Once you see that that's not the case, that's the breakthrough. That's the breakthrough on the spiritual journey. So that's why when I talk, I'm moving you to that place. Now, remember, it's a balance thing, right? So I'm not saying emotion is bad. I'm saying that it has its place and it's a wonderful thing, but that we overuse it. And what it does is it identifies and puts us in a bondage where we don't get to actually see what the possibilities of life are. And what we end up excluding is everyone else. So if you want to be in service to other people, if that's what you feel at the bottom of your life, if you want to, if you're in love with everybody, etc., the moment your story gets emotionally glued to you, you lose that, because all there is you and your position. So notice that when you're talking to folks, when you're working with your own story, are you emotionally sequestered in a place where it's only your story? Or are you holding the fact that your story and other stories can live at the same time? And you'll see an entire difference in how you're located spiritually. Now here's the other thing. The thing that we always do when it comes to individuality is that we try to manage the image of other people. So that's just what we do. And so if you go, I always use the eavesdropping example because I love to eavesdrop. Everybody who knows me, my wife sometimes laughs because we'll go somewhere and I'll go, shh, be quiet. I'm listening to this conversation over here. So I'm pretty famous for that. And I guess I just love to do that because whenever you're eavesdropping, you kind of get a how people work thing, right? You can hear what's going on and you're like going, wow. So I do a lot of my learning by eavesdropping. It's just an educational secret I picked up along the way. And, but when if you go into a restaurant, for instance, that's a good example, and you start to listen to people talk to each other, 90% of what they talk about is adjusting what they think their image ought to be for the other person. 90% of our conversations that we have, if you start to watch, it's us telling someone else who we are and making sure that they have the right perception of us. And so what we're trying to do is we're trying to control that particular perception. So the best thing that I can tell you, just write this down, hold it somewhere, put it on a gold thing on your chain, whatever. You cannot control the perception of others. You can't, right? So what we naturally do is we try to control that. We spend a lot of energy and time. We've been taught to do that. Mom sent you off to school and she said, be a good student. So you went to school and you're like, okay, so what I got to do here is I got to figure out how to make that teacher like me so that when she talks to my mom, she'll say he's a good student, right? So I'm going to figure out what a good student is, and I'm going to project, talk, do whatever. I'm going to do that in order for that to happen. Now, I have that childhood defense where I was what they called an autocrat or a controller. And what that is someone who tries to get other people's attention because it feels safe. So if I had everybody's attention, right? No wonder I do these satsangs, right? I get to control that, right? Luckily I can see my own stuff. So that's wonderful. I know that it doesn't work, but nonetheless, that's what a lot of these activities are about. So that's the kind of patterning I use. So I would go to school and I would tell stories. I'd figure it out. I would like lobby my teacher into seeing me the way that I wanted her to see me, because I knew that when the news went home, I had a shot at being what my mom wanted me to be. That was how I tried to make that little loop happen, right? So we all do that. From a very early age, we're trying to figure out what mom says I'm a good boy. What's a good boy? I better figure out how to get that person to say I'm a good boy. Notice you don't focus on like, gee, what does that mean? Maybe you could get an idea of what the actual thing means is being told to me. No, I worry about whether the image is correct. Now it gets worse. It actually gets worse. The most amazing thing is that, so think about the life that you live. So I'll pick me because I'm pretty good at this. So I go on and I go into business. There's nowhere else in the world that you will find more people posturing to convince other folks that they're really something special than in business. I mean, it is an entire parade of peacocks. That's what business is. Here's my business plan, and let me tell you what a great guy I am. I'm the guy you should give money to, and man, did I do a slick plan. And that's the pitch. That's how we go after it. Now, of course, you know, you and I have been talking about finding your authentic story and having that live through you. That doesn't match to what I'm talking about here. And so that's the reason I'm talking about emotion, is that we all live a life where we live in a circus, if you will. You know, you go to the fairgrounds and the circus and they let you in the entrance, where our life is like that. And inside the entrance, what we do is we work on having other people see us in the way that we want to be seen. So we go into that little thing where the mirrors make us long and fat and all everything. Go, no, that's not me. No, not me. That's not what I look like. So anytime you get distorted in your little circus and fair, you know, you start to basically tell somebody, no, this is what I really am. So you can find that anywhere. So here's the thing, see that for what it is. See that what it does is it takes your time, it takes your energy, and it has you engaged in an activity that ultimately leads nowhere. It's an egoic activity that leads you nowhere. That just simple insight and seeing frees you up to do the rest of your spiritual journey. It gives you a viewpoint from consciousness, and it moves the viewpoint out of you yourself. Because when you quit trying to control that image. So there's another old story about this was a Sufi who lived in you notice I like stories where they're old stories and they come from villages. Who knew? Anyway, this is an old Sufi, and he was a saintly kind of a guy. So in the village, he was highly respected, and people would go to him to get advice. And as luck would have it, one of his neighbors, a young woman, had a secret lover, and she got pregnant. And the problem was she wanted to keep her lover secret, and so she couldn't tell the village and everybody else who the father of the child was. And so she just picked her next door neighbor, the Sufi saint. And so she told the village, oh, the Sufi saint, that's the father. Well, the village came down and they stood outside and they said, hey, dude, you're the father. You have to take this child. And the saint, seeing what was going on in front of him, said, fine, you know, give me the child and I'll raise him as best I can. So the Sufi fellow took the child on, you know. Within a year or two, the things had sorted themselves out. The lover was able to now, become known, and these two got married. And of course, they immediately went out to the village, and the woman said, no, this is actually the father. That child's actually mine. And of course, the village came back and they said, gee, we're really sorry. We jumped to a conclusion that you were the father, but really the child belongs over here. And the Sufi said, of course he does. Here you go. Now, that's a really wonderful story. That's a story about someone who knew that when someone on the outside frames you up in a certain way, that most of the time, if not all of the time, that holding is intellectual and egoically separate. It's in the ego drama. That's where it lives. It lives in the same place that emotion, when it's used to glue to a story, it's that same activity. And so knowing that is such gold. Now, I will tell you that as you play with this one, the first thing you're going to start to find out is that It's really hard to do. Oh man, someone tells a story about you, and guess what? That story you really want to jump into it. Facebook is the feeding ground of this, by the way. Like it amazes me how many big things happen in life, and people think that Facebook is the place you go talk about it. It's like that must be the place that you do all of this imaging and all of this work. So we have a place that we can go do a lot of that, and you can see it happen. Notice if somebody says something about you and you don't think that that's the proper perception, how hard it is not to jump in and help them out. Straight say, no. Here's how it really is. So see that as an activity that we all have been conditioned to do, and see it as an activity that ultimately we have no control over. We might as well tell the sun to move a couple inches up in the sky because it's in the wrong place. You're going to get the same results. The sun's going to be where the sun is. If somebody says, Alan is fill in the blank. So one of the funny things in the world I live in, you can imagine, because we're all humans. And so when you do the kind of thing that I'm engaging in now, there's a tendency for people to go, oh my goodness, let's put this particular person on a pedestal. We'll put them up here, right? And so whenever I hear somebody say, wow, you are really, and they'll tell me how wonderful I am, I always know what that means is that on the day that something happens that doesn't fit their picture of me, I'm going to go as high as I am. I'm going to go that low. That's what's going to happen, because when somebody holds you in high esteem and you do something human, like, say the wrong thing, do the wrong thing, whatever, and it doesn't fit in their definition, you immediately move to the same distance in the crap section that you used to be in the divine section. That's kind of how that operates. That's pure ego. Both positions are pure ego. Wisdom doesn't care. Wisdom has no caring about human flaws and frailties. It doesn't care. It just doesn't care. So the beauty of that is that you can listen to a 7-year-old boy, and we have one on here rolling around, and he'll speak wisdom to you, and then 2 minutes later he's acting like a 7-year-old boy. And you know what? Wisdom doesn't care. It just doesn't care. So remember that the movement of consciousness and wisdom through you has no care for your ups and your downs and who you are and how you look. That's an egoic story. That's all it is. So all I'm trying to say is take a look at that one little pointer, which is, I can't control the outside. You can start to work with that. Holding two stories at the same time is another really wonderful version of the same thing. And you'll start to see that when we do these things where I say, have your perception perceive you and everything that is, you'll start to feel that place in yourself more than you feel the emotional place in yourself, which is the egoic. And I can tell you this, that all personal conflict and drama is carried out on the emotional plane. And so those particular things are always going to live in the battle of egos. That's just where they live. Notice the Sufi who someone claimed it was his son, and he said, great, let me take the child, and and 2 years later it was not his son, and properly that son got placed back with mom and the new lover. That man didn't try to control the perception from the outside. In fact, he accepted it. He said, okay, fine, let's live your story, see how that goes. But he wouldn't have had a need to try to engineer what everybody else thought of him. For 2 years, he was the saint that basically got the next door girl pregnant. Probably not number one on the on the resume of a saint last I checked, you know. So he was a saint with a huge defect. 2 years later, everybody noticed, oh, wait a minute, that's not true. So there it is. The story, our need to have stories be true, that's an emotional glue that keeps us in our ego and keeps us from connecting and serving and loving other people. It's just that simple. So I wanted to just roll through that. I've had a lot of questions about, you know, what the role of emotion is. And so I just wanted to talk about that. Notice what I'm trying to do here. Again, when we have these meetings, it can seem really intellectual, and it's not. I want it to live in your life. So as we talk about these things and I tell these stories, now go notice how that lives in your life. Start to be the watcher of yourself. The story that you are, I always say that's an experiment in the laboratory. And the minute that you can say, I'm going to watch what Alan's doing here, the minute you can say that, you've made your first breakthrough. So that's kind of the key. Whenever you feel identified, frustrated, upset, you can't move, say to yourself, you know, I'm going to watch what's going on here. And what that does is it moves you from the inside, glued, identified with who you think you are, and it moves you out here where you're watching yourself. I don't know if you can see how that happens. And all you have to do is tell yourself, I'm going to go out here, I'm going to watch what's happening over here in the Alan story. So really great, by the way, for if anybody's doing any parenting, awesome little technique. You know, I had my son was one of those children who could put you in a box pretty quickly about what you wanted to happen. And so as a dad, frustration was always readily available. And you'll be shocked. My son's a lot like me. Guess what? I'm sure I wrapped my mother in all sorts of knots when I was his age. So true mothers who wish that their sons get what they got when they have a son. My mom got her wish on that one. So nonetheless, the technique though that I would use is I would go, oh, I want to watch the Alan story. And what I would see was this human being who couldn't sort out what was going on in front of him because he was so invested in having things the way that he wanted. I wanted my son to be the way I wanted my son to be. And what I was not letting happen was my son be who he was. So of course I sent my son off to college and university, and he got an accounting degree and all of this stuff. And when he was all done, you know, he could have interviewed with the big companies and everything. And he came to me, and here's where it came in handy. A great example. And he said, Dad, I've been interviewing with all these fancy companies, and the last thing I want to do is do what you did, which is be with a bunch of stuffed shirts and some glass offices in a building. Don't want to do that. Okay, fair enough. Now notice, I could have said, well, wait a minute, let's talk about what I really was, right? Where's the focus move? Emotional, right? Moves to me. I'm going to tell him how I am. But actually, he was right. I spent my career with a bunch of stuffed shirts and buildings that had glass walls and such in them. That's what I did. That's the world I lived in. Okay, call it as it is. And so I said to him, well, what do you want to do? And he said, Dad, you know what I want to do? He says, with my life, my career, I want to drive a pickup truck and speak Spanish. Okay, right? That was his version of what he wanted to do. And sure enough, he got himself a job running parking lots in the dead downtown of Los Angeles in the apparel district. That's where they sell piñatas and clothes, and there's cars going everywhere. And I mean, it's a real true place that just folks go and they buy stuff, right? So there he was. Now I remember that one fella came to me, a friend of mine, and he says, man, doesn't it make you sad that your son rose to this amazing level, summa cum laude in accounting, and now he's down in the apparel district of LA speaking Spanish and driving a pickup truck? And all I could do was chuckle. He was doing, it's who he was. It's what he wanted to do. So here he is. Here he is, what, 10 years later? He has 120 people. He runs 40 parking lots in downtown LA, drives his truck, speaks Spanish, and all he cares about is his 120 people. The kids, what dad would want anything better than that? 120 folks, my son loves them all. He'd give them the company, I think, if they asked him for it. I mean, you know, he has a Christmas party and I walk in and they treat me like I'm special. It's an amazing thing he's created because he wanted to speak Spanish and drive a pickup truck. That was his story. Now I could have said to him, hey, Mike, you know, look, you have this degree, you're summa cum laude, you're out of this really great university. Man, let's get you to Microsoft or Google or Price Waterhouse like I was, you know, all of that. We could have, you know, dads have the power to kind of shape some of that. And I'd have had a miserable child. But my son loves to be on the street. He loves to speak Spanish and he loves to drive his pickup truck and he likes to run parking lots. He's in the perfect place. And it's being able to go, oh, what's that Alan character doing over there? And what's stopping, you know, why is he in this place of incredible stopped emotion? Why is that happening? And when you look at your relationships, you'll see that. I had an early version of that too. For all of you, I don't think there's any Danish folks in the room, so I can tell this story. I have Irish and Danish. Those are the two major things that happen over here. So my great grandmother was this Danish woman from Copenhagen with this amazing Danish accent. So I grew up with the Danish accent and all things Danish. And I can tell you the thing about the Danes is they're a very direct folk. It's like, you know, here's what we do, here's where we're going, and this is how we're doing it. There's not a lot of subtlety in what goes on there. And so people used to say to me, they would say, my goodness, you get along so well with your mother, and yet when you describe her as a freight train that comes down the tracks. And that was my mom. My mom was a freight train and she was rolling down the tracks. That was how mom was. Loved us all dearly, but that's how mom was. And so they said, how do you do that? And I said, oh, it's really easy. When mom goes by, when that freight train goes by, here's what I do. I'm not on the tracks. I'm somewhere else. That's how you deal with mom, right? Just don't be on the tracks. And they said, well, how in the world did you do that? And I said, well, I figured out somewhere in the process that every time my mom and I got into an argument, I was arguing just to argue. I didn't really care about what we were arguing about. She was arguing about something she actually cared about. And once I saw that, I saw, wow, there's no reason to engage, you know, because what do I care if we have creamed corn or corn on the cob? We're going to have a great meal or whatever it was I would argue with her about. Just get off the tracks. So there was a little practice in seeing myself and going, oh, look at this. The way I engage with my mother is one that can get me into a place where we're doing this. And the way to deal with her is to have another story. What's the other story? Well, the Alan character really doesn't care a lot about what's going on here, right? As opposed to, man, mom said it, I'm going to engage with her and I'm going to argue. That's what I'm going to do. I'm going to engage with mom and I'm going to argue. But you'll notice, especially for a lot of kids when they get into their teenage years, notice what you talk to your mother about and argue with her about, and you're going to notice, guess what? You don't care about what you're talking about with her. You're just having an argument with mom, because that evidently is a tradition. It's a habit that you have. So all of these examples, watch them in your life. The male-female relationship is one of the funniest things I'll ever watch ever, because I will hear a man and a woman argue about something and I know neither one of them cares about what they're talking about. But boy, oh boy, they're having at it, you know, and I can't help but laugh at that. You know, like, you guys are arguing about somebody that neither one of you care about. So watch how we do the need. I call that the need to feed. Inside of us is a need to establish that something is true when there isn't even a possibility of truth being there. Stories don't hold truth. All they do is describe the flow of what's going on in front of you. So if you can kind of see that, that's the spiritual version now. In the world of knowledge, we believe that there are facts and we believe that there are truths, and a lot of people spend their lives sorting that out. God bless them. But in the world of spiritual movement, all there is being. The whole spiritual journey is about moving out of your intellectual self as who you think you are and into a sense of being. So who you are is here and now, and it's being. What is true or not true about that? I mean, unless you can tell me you don't exist, right? Because you can always say to somebody, that's where I start with folks a lot of time. I go, do you exist? And they go, what are you asking me? And I go, well, do you exist? And they'll go, well, yeah, I exist. I go, great. That's the first spiritual principle. Now, remember, this is the second spiritual principle. The rest is interpretation. The rest is made up story, every last bit of it. At the bottom of who you are, there's only one thing: I exist. I am. And all we're trying to do in the spiritual journey is put that I am in balance with the rest of what has always been happening in your life. We've been taught that we've been taught that being has no relevance. We don't even talk about that in most of what we do. But who you are, I exist, that is consciousness itself. That's who you are. Right? So in a way, when you're seeking to be something that you're not, you're missing. The seeking is who you already are. The being is already there. So all we're trying to do is reveal to you what you already are. We're not trying to find a new version of you at all. That's not what's going on here. Right? And so when I start to talk about these ego pieces, emotion is the glue, etc., those are ways of trying to dissolve the perception and the structure that you have of yourself inside. And that dissolution leads you into dropping into your own being. That's what the possibility is. So that's where I am on that. In fact, a lot of you are in the spiritual MBA, and so the next meeting that we do, I had you all pick a pointer. What am I trying to do? I'm trying to get you to see how we're using pointers to dissolve what you think that you already hold as an assumption. We're trying to dissolve assumptions. So that's all that's going on in these meetings and in this whole journey that we're on. What are the assumptions that we hold? A lot of them that we don't see, that keep us locked into place. And then today's version was, what's the glue? The glue a lot of times is emotion, right? Emotion has the nature of gluing you to the story that you think you are. So I'm trying to tell you how to dissolve that glue so that the ability to hold two stories at one time, that's one way to dissolve the glue. Stepping outside and watching yourself, that's a way to dissolve the glue. Right? That's what's going on. How do we drop you into consciousness itself? That's what we're up to. All right, so I've rambled on as usual, much longer than I should have. My 10-minute version was 40 minutes? Yeah, not bad. Anyway, my grandfather said I never met a conversation I didn't like. Welcome to Allen land. Any questions? Any questions? Does anybody want to lob one in here? If you do, I will be thrilled to answer it. But I want you to watch this. You know, one of the things that happens is in your own world, a lot of you are in business. A lot of you have relationships. So remember, when I talk about acceptance and surrender and dispassion, I'm not saying that when you love everybody that you don't use your intelligence, right? So if you can understand why a dangerous person is in the place that they are, that's a compassionate, empathetic place to live, right? I'm not telling you intelligently that you should go hang out with that person. right? See that, you don't have to make, make your activity of love and compassion and empathy mean that you do something behaviorally. You're going to do the intelligent things, but it also doesn't mean that I don't empathize. I understand why that is. So one of the books that we all read, or I give you, is Viktor Frankl's Search for Meaning. So here you have a man that was in Auschwitz, a Jewish man scheduled to go into the ovens. And he starts these meditations. And when he's done, can you think of somebody who's more victimized than that? Like the perfect victim. I'm in a cell, I'm in Auschwitz, I'm slated for the oven, and I have no control over what's going to happen. That's got to be the definition of a victim, right? And Viktor Frankl in his meditations says, what should we, how can I look at this differently? And in the end, here's the conclusion that he comes to. The victims are my jailers. The true slaves to the system are the people that feel a need to do what they're doing. I just happen to be in the way. And that's where he gets to. So in the most victimized situation, he was able to move to that place. So I'm gonna say that if he can do that, you and I can walk around in the world that we live in today and actually do that same kind of movement. We can take a look and dissolve our own dramas. Because sometimes people will say it's too hard for me to do, and I'm going, well, okay, read Viktor Frankl. And if you think your life's worse than Viktor Frankl's, no problem. I'll cede that you can't actually engage in this. But if you come back and tell me that you're better off than Viktor Frankl, I haven't met anybody, by the way, that is in a worse position than Viktor was. So think about it. I just don't know anybody who's in a cell slated to basically be killed in an oven. I haven't met anybody like that yet. So everybody has got a better version of life than that. So the minute that you say that, then guess what? If he can sit in a cell and get to that place where he can dissolve the story, then all of us are available to do that. So give yourself to do that. So, all right. I got some questions. This is awesome. This is cool. By the way, on the pointers, there are two places you can find my pointer stories. But one main place, if you go to Awaken Stories on YouTube, there's 12 of them in there. And so for those in the spiritual MBA, actually in the module, I think I had 5 or 6, and it included some of those, but you'll see if you go to YouTube, you can find a bunch more. So any of those pointers, and all those pointers are pointing at something and attempting to dissolve a preconceived notion that you have that keeps you in bondage. That's what pointers do, okay? So here we go. Let me come back here. How can I use techniques to allow me to watch the story unfold despite there being so many distractions? So that's from Sabrina. So Sabrina, it's only your mind that tells you have distractions, right? In the business world, people come to me and they go, Alan, I can't do it. Look at this to-do list. And I said, I tell you what, don't you kind of know what's on the to-do list? Yeah, I do. Good. Throw it in the trash. Go do the first thing that hits you that needs to be done. And then after that, do the next thing that hits you that needs to be done. And at the end of the day, cross the stuff off the list that you did, and then the rest is left over for tomorrow. And then tomorrow, read the list, throw it away again, and do the same thing. And all of a sudden, guess what? There's no sense of there being distractions. So Sabrina, if you will do what magnetizes you every moment, there are no distractions. Your mind is being distracted, but your magnetic energy will keep your mind on the bench while you engage with whatever's in front of it. And they always think I'm nuts when I tell them that in the business world, but anybody who tries it, all of a sudden they go, wow, I feel free, I feel alive, and I'm getting all my stuff done. Not that you don't I still write to-do lists, I really do, and then I throw them away. I do exactly what I just told you. I write these to-do lists and then I throw them away because the to-do list is such a habit of mine, and it kind of does remind me of the stuff that's there. And then I go do what's important. So that really, really does work. What attracts you? Okay. All right, Donovan. Free will versus manifesting and creating. Intention. I think I kind of asked similar question, but still wondering. Okay, so remember, free will is what we apply to our concept of ourselves. We think we are an individual author of our own story. And when we think that, then we say, oh, that story must have free will. But when one is lived by existence, when consciousness just simply lives you into being, whether there's free will or not, there's no sense of free will. All there is a sense of pure authenticity and pure, pure love and pure connection. The need to understand whether there's free will or not doesn't really exist in consciousness. It doesn't seem to care. The only place that caring for free will lives is in the mind that wants to know whether the story, right? Think about that for a minute. It's a little like I read a novel, and after I read the novel, all the characters in the novel sent me an email and asked me whether they had free will. Like, well, no, you don't have free will. The damn novel's written. It happened the way, no, right? But why would you ask that of a story? The story was a story. It happened how it happened, and all we're doing is recording the story that happened. So your story is no different. All your story is extracted and it lives in your mind. And so free will is either it is or it isn't, but it's not worth talking about because there's no experience of it when it happens. The same with intention. All intention is the mind going, I wish I had, and let's get some energy and put it behind it. When in fact, authentically, if you live in consciousness, you're going to be lived perfectly authentically. So which would you rather have? Ask yourself what my mind created that it wants me to do, or my true authentic movement in consciousness. You pick. Most people I know are like, because they'll say to me, oh my God, I want to be abundant. And I go, well, could be or could not be. I don't know if you're going to be abundant. Most people I know are going to be abundant because guess what? They live in the business world, and the business world happens to be a place where abundance lives. So great, we're going to have abundance. How much, I can't tell you. How little, I can't tell you. But you're in the right place, right? If this is authentically where you belong, probably got a pretty good shot at abundance. But to craft your intention around it seems a little silly. You know, my son asked me one day a few weeks back, he said, Dad, what would happen if you had another $1 million? What if I gave you $1 million? No, wait a minute. That sounds like I have $1 million. I don't. But anyway, he said, what would happen if you had $1 million? And I said, well, I guess I'd put it in an account. And he goes, yeah, you don't really have anything to do with that. I said, no, I needed a fence and it's already in. So I really don't have anything that I need for my $1 million. So I'd put it in an account. And my son says the following thing to me. So the only difference that $1 million would make to you is the number on your account statement that you get every month. And I go, yeah, that's pretty much it. That's what $1 million would do for old Alan. When you look at people who want abundance, you're going to find it's their ego who is feeling separate and incomplete, and it's trying to fill that hole. And they think abundance will do that. That's what abundance serves for. But when abundance really happens, most of it, we have no need for it. Most of the people I know, when they live in their charitable selves, they have what they need, they give away what they don't, you know, and life is a wonderful thing, and they live the moment. That's what they do. So if you've ever been around real billionaires, you're not going to invite them to your next party. I'm here to tell you, it's a really boring conversation. You know, have a ton of money. That's awesome, I guess. But the reality is, how does it reflect authentically in who you are? Now, it doesn't mean that you may not need $1 billion. If you do, great. It'll show up. Life will be great. It will. You'll get what you need out of that. But I can tell you this: if you are on the spiritual journey and you win the lottery, make sure you do it while you're still in ego. So there's someone to be happy about it, because when you're simply consciousness itself, there's actually no one to claim it. So make sure if you win the lottery, do it as an ego, because that's where the payoff is for that kind of thing. Once authentically one is lived, there's nothing. Money doesn't matter anymore. Abundance. What is abundance? That becomes the question. So anyway, there's Donovan's. So Paolo, this is great. When we come across someone who is destructive, how can we learn from them? What's the story that got him there, Paolo? Right? What's the story that got him there? And I know you really, so the thing, just for everybody, Paolo and I are pretty close, so I'm going to speak from that place. I know how you are in your heart. If you and I figured that somebody was in a really terrible place and you and I could figure out the story of what got them there, you and I would sit together and we would cry. That's what would happen, because that's how you and I are. So when you come across someone destructive, what's their story and what got them there? Now, Paolo, that doesn't mean you need to go hang around with them. It doesn't mean you need to invite them home. It doesn't mean any of that stuff, because we use our intelligence, but it doesn't mean we don't love them and we can't figure out what got them there, right? And then you and I can talk about it and have our little tears that happen, because that's how you and I are built, because we love people that way, right? We can't help ourselves. So that's a wonderful place to be. And there's a wonderful place for emotion. There's a piece of emotion that actually kind of rolls in behind consciousness itself when it understands that somebody who's entirely destructive is just us in a different story, right? Probably the most brilliant criminal in the world is just an Alan character that had a few different occurrences than this one did. I would make a lousy criminal, by the way. I talk too much. So anyway, so that's that question. Okay, here we go. How can I make peace with not having enough time to do what I love, which is reading and writing? Well, Sabrina, come on. Oh, I already answered that, right? If it magnetizes you to do it, that'll become the most important thing that's in your life, and reading and writing will happen. But if somebody needs something, then I know that magnetizes you too. So you let what magnetizes you magnetize. So right now I'm running a spiritual MBA program. Remember, Sabrina, I was writing a book. Not so much writing is happening right now, because this is what I'm doing, right? The calls, this is the call. So this is what I'm doing, right? Happily so, thrilled, life is awesome. Not writing a bunch. But you know, I love to write. In fact, when I get it done, you're gonna, set about to figure out how we're gonna publish and distribute it and all that stuff. So, yeah. But I want to let you know it's not coming tomorrow. So that's.
I feel like that's the frustration. Like I love writing, I love reading, but I don't get any time to. But yeah, I just need to surrender.
Yeah. Let it happen. Let it happen. It's like, it'll happen. If writing wants to happen, trust me, nothing will stop it. One of the funny things in my book was the first one in 2012. I said, I kept threatening that a book was going to happen, right? And that went on for several years. And then one day the book wanted to happen. I wrote that book in 8 weeks. I mean, it really wanted to happen. There's no doubt about it. My poor editor was going, no, stop. Like nobody can edit this fast, because I was writing a chapter every day. I'm like, okay, here's a chapter. Oh, here's another chapter. Here's a chapter. Have one of those. I think there were something like 16 chapters in the book. And of course, those are going back and forth in the edit process and everything. But at the end of 8 weeks, I was popping out 2 chapters a week, so, that was what was going on. So when it wanted to get written, nothing can stop it. That's always.
It sounds like a metaphor for labor, childbirth. It's like when it's happening, it's going to happen. Yeah. I remember it was funny. I had a funny conversation one day. I jumped off a 100-foot cliff into the water because a friend convinced me to do it,
as I stepped off into midair, I remember thinking to myself, oh my goodness, you can't reverse this. This is not reversible. There was like this moment where I'm like going, yeah, I'm in midair and I'm headed to the water. That's what's going to happen next. And I told that story, and a woman, a friend of mine, said, you know what, friend, that's what it's like to be pregnant. She said, you're flapping your airs in midair, and you know what? You're going to have that baby. That is what's going to happen. She said, absolutely. She says, it's just that your fall was a few seconds and mine's 9 months. I said, well, there is that. So, but once that happens, you're going to hit the water. So, okay. Here's a question. What are signs of success, and what are its negatives with regard to the marital relationship? And is there a real ambition, in success? So that's the abundance question again. In both in marital and all relationships, the question really comes to play: what wants to happen inside of them, right? So that's a pointer that I use a lot. What wants to happen? Why do I use the what wants to happen pointer? By the way, I'm going to give this one away for anybody that wants to use the what wants to happen pointer in the next mentoring. Here it is. We always watch and we ask ourselves, what does the mind want to do? And that's how we think about how the future happens. But if you look at your own life and how you're built, you can actually look out there and go, what wants to happen in this moment? If Alan weren't trying to make something happen, what wants to happen? When you can see what wants to happen, that's the story that you can emerge in. So when you look at success and ambition, you can say, oh, does it live or does it not? I lived an incredible business career. I think people probably would have said I was ambitious. I would tell you I don't have a lot of ambition internally. What happened was the story that wanted to happen when Alan was involved was what happened. I was involved with companies. I was working with executives. I had insight about how business operated. That really was what wanted to happen. It got defined as ambition, and it got defined as success. Okay, that's fine. But what wanted to happen was an authentic story of being in service and the spiritual journey. I wanted the spiritual journey to be available in the corporate world. I know that was an odd thing, but for some reason, that's what happened. That's what wanted to happen over here, and that's what went and happened. The money and the success and the ambition that was painted on as a result of that by others who created the story, that's fine and that's wonderful. So when you think of that, right, look at your marital relationship, look at your ambition, and start to ask yourself, is this happening in a free and authentic way? Because if it is, great. If it's awesome. Those of us who live in the corporate world, a lot of us are meant to be there. We are perfect. I call us corporate animals. We live out on the terrain where corporate animals roam freely. It's awesome. It's what we do. It's a perfect, authentic place to live. There's a lot of others that are out there on that terrain that are living it from a different place. So the spiritual journey can take place on that terrain. The spiritual journey can take place in your marriage. It can take place anywhere. But what wants to happen is what's important versus what you try to make happen. And there's a different feeling that goes with those two things, right? So start to notice that. It's the same as when I talked about emotion before. When you can back out from emotion, you can basically see that the charge leaves, right? When you hold two stories at the same time, you understand where the other person is. Like I talked about Paulo, you can see that happens. That feels different than me trying to make something happen. When the ego says, I'm glued to this and I'm trying to make something happen. Notice the felt experience of those two things. That's what I'm inviting you to do. You'll notice that one of them is a sense of being, one of them is a sense of thinking. Whenever you're in the sense of thinking, you're likely in the wrong place. Whenever you're in the sense of being, you guarantee you're in the right place. If the thinking happens because of the being, Great. Now the mind is properly located. Okay. Yep. Yeah. So Leah, definitely pay attention to what it is that magnetizes you, especially you, because you've got such great radar for that, right? So if I were to coach you one-on-one, I would say, hey, take that magnetic radar that you have, because we know that you have it, right? And lean into that. See what your to-do list looks like when you let it get made up. You can write it ahead of time like I do, so you kind of know what's on it. Throw it away, turn that radar on, and let it magnetize and see what wants to happen. And what I noticed is, at the end of the day, if there's something that was on the to-do list that didn't get done, I rarely, if ever, regret that it didn't get done, because you know what? I was doing what wanted to happen. I know it sounds, but turn it loose and do that, because especially in your world, healers especially, anybody who's a healer, you know what it means to have energy move through you as a conduit. That's your superpower. Go live there. If you're a healer, go live in the conduit energy that you are as a healer. That's where that will teach you everything. And I guarantee you, healing energy, I've never seen healing energy come with a to-do list. Never been presented with that, right? It doesn't care. It does not care what your to-do list is. It just doesn't care. So especially, you know, this is for Leah. I mean, you know, you're a healer. Go be a healer. And tell everybody.
Thank you.
Okay.
Yeah, that really helps me, actually, what you said about the to-do list and stuff. And it just made so much sense to me, because that's how my brain works. When you said it, I thought, oh my God, that makes so much sense, because it drains me to even just write it. And then I don't want to, then I get overwhelmed. Yep. And then it's like I leave it purposely, because I just don't want to do it. And then then I'll look at it and I'll be like, I didn't do anything. And then I'm a bit upset with myself because I didn't do anything. Yeah. And then I have to really force myself to do it. So it's just there's no joy in life. It's not joy giving. But what you said, it feels more authentic and organic. And I know that it's going to be the same things that I'll do, but it will be just coming from a different space. So thank you so much. That really helps.
So part of what I did, because like you know, my gift ultimately isn't in the mind. I use the mind a lot. So, you know, I end up, you know, treating my mind like it's a ticket to a fantasy show. And I laugh at it a lot. Because, right? Yeah. Because you know what I'm talking. I mean, so your energy, you can feel that in you.
I do.
Right. So it's been painted. So someone painted onto you to pay attention to all this mind stuff. And now we're going, what should I do with all the mind stuff? Yeah. But when you're really in action, the mind stuff isn't there. And so you can step into that. And so here's what I always tell people like you. I go, look, step into it and live it. Right. And in the moment of doubt, if you have a moment of doubt, just give me a quick call and I'll tell you, you're on the right track. You know, well, because I know you are, right? I don't have to think much about that. If it's between your movement and what your mind is telling you, it's your movement every time. And if you need somebody to put a vote in there to help you out, my vote's for your movement. It'll always be against the mind. So you can pretend you call me and get the vote if you'd like. Yeah, my vote will always be
I will.
What's moving through you. That's always going to be my vote. So yeah, great.
Yeah, that's perfect. That's amazing. Thank you.
You're welcome, love. All right, man. So there you go. I'm hoping that today that everybody got what they needed. I think I've answered all of the questions. I love the overwhelming one. It's funny. I didn't think we'd walk into that one today, but it's a lovely one. Is there another question? Does somebody want to jump in? If you do, jump in. If not, I think we've reached. Yeah, go ahead, Dilraj.
Just a very quick question. You mentioned in the beginning about 2 stories that we should tell ourselves 2 stories. Is that right?
Yep.
And you mentioned about the you know, the the bleep person who's cut you up,
Yeah.
and then the dad who's taking his daughter to the hospital.
Right.
So let's say you've got a story and you want to, I don't know, you want to save the world.
Yeah.
And obviously you've got involved with that story, because that's the egoic identity that it's me going to save the world, like a superhero, whatever it is. What could be the second story in that scenario?
It's almost like I'll send you my check later, because what a great question. So what happens in the first story? So saving the world is one of the things we all get involved in, right? Because we look outside and we say, oh, wait, I'm Alan, I'm powerful, and the world really looks like it needs some saving. So you know what? I better go save it. And then we go find lots of Alan that will help us go save it, right? So we go do that. Okay. So just let me ask you a simple question. If you had the choice between Dilraj, the story, saving the world, and consciousness saving the world, which one would you pick?
Consciousness saving the world anytime.
So one of the things when you get on the spiritual journey that you kind of have people do is de-link from any of those stories and then let consciousness live itself through you. And then the world gets saved in the way that consciousness is after it, rather than in the way that the story of Dilraj or Alan or any of these characters that are just stories anyway are after it, right? So it's just that. So the other story to tell yourself is, Dilraj wants to go save. He wants to go down and he wants to save, whatever it happens to be, right? But I wonder what consciousness really wants. What's that story? Right? And in yourself, if what needs to happen is your spirit, because consciousness is leading you through a spiritual journey. Right now, that's what you and I are engaged in, right? I'm thinking that's what wants to happen. I'm really clear. That's what wants to happen. Okay. So someone could criticize you and say, Dilraj, you just gave up an hour and a half with some crazy man talking about God knows what, right? And you could have been out saving the world, right? That could be coming in, right? And yet here you are. So I would say, are you going to trust in consciousness? Or are you going to trust in the story that Dilraj has about saving the world? And that'll de-link you from that. Now, saving the world may very well happen. I'm not saying that it won't. It just may not be in the way you think it's going to happen, and all right? Because all of the right things, I mean, will happen. At the bottom of every authentic story, just remember this one: the more authentic a story is, the more it seeks to serve. Period. Right? So when you take people to the bottom of their authentic story and you have them root into consciousness and be lived into that story, then the ultimate seeking to serve is going to occur from that movement. Going to happen. So whatever part of the world you're deemed to save, that saving is going to happen, right? So that's the answer to your question. So what is
Thank you so much.
Always a great question. What does consciousness want to happen, right? It's the question. I told you the story of me in the dumpster helping the guy get the bottles. Remember, I told that story some time back, right? It's like that.
Yeah, that's right.
Am I saving the world? I don't know, but I'm helping my friend get bottles out of the dumpster because he wasn't physically able that day, right?
With all the CEOs, yeah.
Right. So that was that particular piece. All right, guys. Thank you for that last question. I'll be back in 2 weeks. By the way, there was a question. Satsang's open to everybody. One of the reasons that I want everybody to be here is to always, like what Dilraj and I just did, you get to see the questions of everyone and where they come from. So you're going to hear a lot of questions that that used to be your questions 3 weeks ago, and now it's somebody else's question. It's a really great thing to see, is to see that particular differential, if you can. All right. I love you all. I will see you next time. 2 weeks from today, and I'll see the SMMBA people next Wednesday. We'll do our mentorship. Remember to do your pointer if you're in the group. All right. Much love.